Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hey, welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Paul Sheehan.
And we hope you like that new intro. Where does that new intro come from?
One of our former guests, Tombstone, wrote that for us. That's a condensed version. I will be putting the full version up later today on our Facebook page, but it is definitely some really awesome lyrics. And it really, I think, hits the spirit of what our show is all about, which is skepticism and critical thinking. And he did a bang-up job.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Tombstone. Also, we want you to know that your money is being put to excellent use. We took David Tamayo, got on his transhumanist wings, and we flew him all the way out to California, and we're going to have an excellent guest.
Wait a second. What do you mean we flew David Tamayo out to?
Wait, didn't you get the note?
No.
Huh, that's weird. I'm pretty sure David was supposed to take care of that.
This is not on our credit card, is it?
Well, you're not paying us. It's on somebody's credit card.
Well, hang on a second, man. There's no money on the account. You're telling me we flew David Tamayo out to California and we got no way of paying for it?
I think mostly this is Lawrence Krause's fault, for that whole space travel thing that we needed a few weeks ago. So if you have an issue, just take it up with him.
Oh my. Well, you know what? I think Carrie, our technical director, is going to have to pull up our check because we need funds in the account to cover this. Otherwise, David's going to be stuck out in California. We're going to have no way to get him back.
So you're saying if our viewers want to see more of David Tamayo, they need to pour some of their funds into this, or he's stuck there forever?
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to get him back on a wing and a prayer. So it sounds like our viewers are going to have to do something.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, and in addition to getting David back, one of the things that people donating can do is, this is very interesting news. We got another public access station that is shown an interest in re-airing our shows, and Rick Wingrove, one of our hosts, has also found a Hulu-style, up-and-coming web kind of television station that has also expressed interest in re-airing our shows. And in order to do that, we have to send them DVDs, and there's the cost of the DVD, and there's a cost of mailing that to them. So if you really want to get the words of atheism and skepticism out there, we need your help in having you send donations to our show so that we can duplicate and get these out to where they need to go and spread the word.
Right, and we really do run on a shoestring budget, and we'll put anything that you guys send us, it's very much appreciated, and we'll put it to good use.
Absolutely. And word is getting out, Rob. In fact, atheism.tv is promoting our show as well, and they're also working with us. They are now also going to produce news segments, which we're going to show today. It's a very well produced news segment. So we're very excited to be working in conjunction with them. But again, viewer support comes in two forms. One is financial donations to the show through Fairfax Public Access, and the other is spreading the word. If you're watching this show, we're asking you to share the links of the YouTube videos with your friends and family. If you're on Facebook, please show and share our Facebook page so we can get more likes, generate talk. It looks like we're on the brink of actually going somewhere with this show, and we need our viewers' support to make that happen. So if you can't afford a donation, there's certainly plenty for you to do by hitting that share button.
Right, I'd say one other place that we've gotten some good support are from guests that have been on the show before that we love to incorporate some of the work that they're doing. We're going to do that in a little while. Justin Vacula was on here several months ago, and he's participating in an interesting protest coming up in just a few days. So we'll get to that clip. But really, any authors or guests that have been here before, please reach out to us, let us know what's going on, and kind of try to work together to get the word out.
Absolutely. We always, this is a show where we want to help the atheist and skeptic community grow, and the way we do this is to help give voice and airtime to people with those perspectives. And that leads me to an interesting point. We have a really interesting guest today coming on. Maybe you can give us a brief taste of that before we get into some more of our announcements and news.
Well, sure. Zoltan Istvan is one of the leading thinkers in the transhumanist community. I'll have to admit that I really knew almost nothing about transhumanism before doing a little research for this, although David Tamayo mentioned it a couple of times. But he's written this book, The Transhumanist Wager, and this puts in a novel form for people that enjoy a story, a bunch of the main themes that you'll find in transhumanism. So we'll be talking about both his book and transhumanism. They really go hand in hand, so I think it'll be a very educational experience.
Cool. And you had some interesting news you wanted to talk about with, I know we've had some...
Well, why don't we start with the hypocrisy bit of news?
There's no hypocrisy. We never deal with hypocrisy
surprisingly
on the
enough.
show.
So in Hobby Lobby news, Mother Jones broke this, I think a week or two ago, that you'll remember that whole furor where they didn't like Obamacare, they didn't like the idea that this billionaire, any of his thousands or tens of thousands of employees could ever get contraceptive coverage because that would just infringe on his rights to infringe on their rights. Mm-hmm. It turns out that he did not have any problem investing roughly 73 million of his dollars in the very same pharmaceutical companies that are producing all these contraceptives that he's railing against. So evidently, as long as there's some profit involved, then it's okay. I just thought that was one of the peaks of hypocrisy I've seen in the last week.
Yeah, it reminds me of that role model of Christian values, the KKK guy that was just arrested, who it's now come out, I think in the 1980s, was arrested for having sex with a black male prostitute. It's just extraordinary to me, the hypocrisy of people who are so entrenched in this kind of crusade mentality, how it always just comes back to bite them in the butt. It makes you really wonder if there's something true to the harder someone fights and rallies against something that has nothing to do with them, that maybe they're in the closet on it. And
yeah, Robert, I told you before the show, Robert Trivers, there's another great book here, The Folly of Fools. Mm-hmm. And he actually talks about in this book and in some of his other talks how they did a test where they would measure the turgidity of the male member when just regular straight guys who didn't really care about people being gay versus those that were militantly opposed to it. And so if you showed gay pornography to those guys that, they're not gay, but they don't really care, they didn't get much of a reaction. If you showed, I think, female on female, it had some high reaction. But can you guess who had the giant response to the gay porn that they rail against?
Oh, probably religious leaders. And
stunning, isn't it?
Stunning, yeah.
So all these, every time that we see one of these things that you just mentioned, somebody gets caught doing that. I don't care if somebody is gay, it really doesn't hurt me in any way, but these people that are so adamant against it, I don't really care that they're gay, but I do care that they're taking political roles and getting rid of everybody else's rights. It's nice to see that it's confirmed by psychology.
Well, and I think there's something to be said. You got the Hobby Lobby, and then you get this KKK guy, and what you're covering in this book, and there does seem to be something against people who fight against some internal struggle that they can't really define. They're not able to come to terms with themselves, and rational thinkers who really kind of try to understand why they feel the way they do and try to come to terms with it. And sadly, far too often, it's like you usually don't hear of a KKK guy or someone like Hobby Lobby not having hypocrisy in their closet, and there usually is immense amounts of hypocrisy. I mean, the Hobby Lobby folks, we're against you being able to have your rights, but if you're going to have your rights, we're going to make a profit
exactly.
off of it. It's just like, wow.
Money's always at the root. Tying into that hypocrisy, last thing I want to bring up was the idea of faith killing instead of faith healing. And I'll give you one story. There's the Church of the Firstborn, fundamentalist church, and apparently they've had 82 children die since, I think, the mid-70s from their parents not giving them appropriate medical care because, of course, that's God's domain, I suppose. In one of those cases, I think either a parent or somebody who's quite closely related whose child died because of this. Sometime during the trial, she was out getting medical treatment for an ingrown toenail. So again, I just thought that was a great level of hypocrisy that their kid can die, but for them, they don't mind actually getting treated. Anyway,
well, that's because they know what's best, and that's the danger of kids not having rights in our society to things like free health care and having access because other people are making decisions for them. So while I am for parental rights, there's got to be a balance, when you're making decisions. But it also brings up an interesting biblical perspective. It's like, okay, if we're going to vaccinate kids and we're going to take them to hospitals, we're taking away God's ability to give wrath wiping out of whole populations and societies. It's like, well, I guess God can't wipe these people out with the plague anymore. They're all vaccinated. And so I can see why the religious right rails and hates vaccination in modern medicine, because it interrupts their biblical thinking and prophecy. So what are you going to do?
I did see one good line in Zoltan's book that I should mention now about where we atheists are merely out to not believe in God, how the transhumanists are out to slay God. I forgot the exact word, but he had a great line in there about that. One of the other things that we're kind of talking about is all of these things really matter what people believe, and they matter a whole lot more when the wall between church and state is being eroded. And I think, why don't we have a clip from Justin Vacula that deals with that exact matter, then we'll come back and do some news segments after that, you said?
Well, yeah, we're going to go to a break, but Justin's going to take us to our break, folks, and then we're going to go into our news, and then when we come back, we're going to have David Tamayo, who's sitting with Zoltan, and they're going to talk to us about transhumanism. Okay. So there we go.
Listeners, this is Justin Vacula, co-organizer, spokesperson for the Northeastern Pennsylvania Free Thought Society, atheist activist, and church-state activist. I will be protesting the upcoming Circle the Square with Prayer event in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which commemorates the National Day of Prayer, a government endorsement of a religious message which asked citizens to pray. Last year I protested the event, and this year I will be returning. Alongside the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I am hanging a banner reading "Nothing Fails Like Prayer," which will be displayed before, during, and after the event, hanging for all attendees and passerby to see. I intend to engage with religious individuals civilly and peacefully to educate on matters of secularism, atheism, and separation of church and state. I don't believe the government should be getting involved in prayer. Religious decisions should be up to individuals, and for that reason, I am protesting. Alongside with my objection to the efficacy of prayer, attendees of the event and others claiming that political officials should use prayer to find answers to solutions in this world. I don't think that's effective. We haven't seen that working. At a May 30th, 2013 City Council meeting, the mayor of Wilkes-Barre, Thomas Layton, did not like the Nothing Fails Like Prayer banner, which had previously hung on Public Square. When questioned about the banner and its hanging, he said, quote, "We live in a free country. Unfortunately, everybody has the rights to whatever they want to say," unquote, after noting that he and council members are, quote, "people of faith." In response to the mayor and the government endorsement of religion, I am eager to protest this event, educate, and have some fruitful dialogue with event attendees and passerbys.
In 1965, the state of Oregon adopted a statute which allowed for parents to request that their children be excused from school on a regular basis for the purposes of receiving religious instruction during the day. Under the statute, elementary school children may be excused for 2 hours a week and high school students for 5. For the last 30 years, a non-profit organisation called the Portland-released Time Education Program, known as Prep for Kids, has administered religious education programs at 26 elementary schools and 2 middle schools in and around Portland, Oregon. While the organisation says the classes are not allowed to teach any particular denomination or doctrine of Christianity, it is completely Bible-based. The classes run on a 4-year cycle, with each year teaching a different biblical epoch from Genesis to Acts. Several teachers, associations and unions have warned over the years that attendance in school is one of the most critical factors for academic success. In some studies, kindergarteners and first graders missing as little as 3% of classroom instruction struggled with delays in reading and writing as far along into the future as the 5th grade. While the amount of time the Oregon law allowed for religious instruction doesn't even come close to this 3% threshold, most educators strongly discourage students from missing any classroom time. Lake, Virginia, has been forced out of her Christian school for not meeting biblical standards of femininity. Timberlake Christian School sent a letter to Sunny's grandparents, Doris and Carol Thompson, claiming that other students in the school were unable to determine Sunny's gender and that it had been upsetting to the girl. Sunny, in a t-shirt and jeans, looks no different from other children her age. With a messy pixie cut and a few missing baby teeth, Sunny is undoubtedly a tomboy. To the administration and the faculty of the Timberlake Christian School, however, her appearance and personality were not in keeping with biblical standards and disturbed the classroom environment, despite Sunny's good academic record. The letter sent to the Thompsons quoted Bible verses and said the school reserved the right to deny Sunny's enrolment on the basis of her appearance, promoting alternative lifestyles. The school claims to have had other problems with Sunny and that the disturbances surrounding the girl's dress and behaviour were part of a larger issue. The Thompsons are amazed that anybody could discriminate against a child for their appearance in this way. Meanwhile, grandmother Doris says Sunny knows full well who she is and dresses the way she does because it is what suits her best for the kinds of activities she enjoys. Doris also claims it never occurred to her to try and change anything about her granddaughter. Timberlake Christian Schools are a ministry of Timberlake Baptist Church. Founded in 1966 in Lynchburg, Virginia, TCS is a private school centered around Christian gospel teachings and offering an education specifically tailored to the biblical worldview, as well as a 75% discount on tuition for outgoing seniors at Jerry Falwell's nearby Liberty University.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humour, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait, look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Well, thank you to Justin for that update on the separation of church and state issues. To Atheism TV, how many people really believe that the kids have a problem with the tomboy as opposed to the funny fundamentalists who probably took over the school board and have a problem with the tomboy?
Well, it blows my mind that a church, which is supposed to be serving a public interest, supposed to be helping the community. We all think about them feeding the homeless and caring for the poor, and this image of Christ, taking people under his wing, can discriminate against a child based on the way that they look and say, well, you don't appear to be a man or male or female, therefore you don't belong.
And oddly enough, think of all the images of Christ that are so popular here. It's kind of a relatively effeminate figure with that long flowing hair, not one of those burly guys. Yeah. So I'm not sure that Christ would be on board with picking on the kid.
I don't think that the image of Christianity that we have in this country that Christ would accept that either. In fact, you know what we really need is we need some humanism brought into this conversation, and I think we're getting ready to do that with some transhumanism. I want to welcome Zoltan, who's sitting with one of our hosts, David Tamayo, out in California. Welcome to Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. David, do you want to start us off with just a quick recap of what happened at the American Atheist Convention this past week?
Yes, thank you. So I'll tell you how it went. It went great as always. The 2014 American Atheist National Convention was held April 17th through the 20th, which was last weekend at the Hilton in Salt Lake City, Utah. And this was the 40th annual convention, which featured keynote speaker, professional football player, Chris Kluwe. Chris is an outspoken advocate of LGBT equality, free speech, and other social issues. And he also happens to be one of the best punters in the NFL. Now, he made news when he wrote about bigotry that he experienced as a result of his support for marriage equality. So he has been in the CNN's Anderson Cooper, the Colbert Report, Ellen DeGeneres Show, and many others. Now, they had, as always, a big cast of great speakers. They had the Reverend Barry Lynn, the executive director of the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. They had Miriam Namazi, who's a spokesperson for the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and Matt Dillahunty, who I consider to be the best atheist debater out there, and he's also the host of the Atheist Experience TV show. And Greta Christina, P.Z. Myers, David Silverman, the president of American Atheists, but also another David Silverman, who happens to be the animator and director of The Simpsons and the Simpsons movie. We had Faisal Saeed Al-Mutar, one of our locals in D.C. We had Brian Keith Dalton, who's the creator of the film series Mr. Deity, comedian Steve Hill, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a huge list of people that we had there. And they had also about 30 or so exhibitors and sponsors. And of course, we all visited the Mormon holy grounds, and we had basically a blast. There was a sense of being in a city where, that resembled a scene from Children of the Corn. There was a lot, people are very hush and kind of weird. It's just very weird kind of thing. We definitely need to do a show on the Mormon cult and mythology at some point, but it was really interesting. I was approached by three sets, they come in sets, three sets of young boys and girls to try to convert me to Mormonism, and they usually left horrified and with a lot of questions for a while. But they come for a conversation, and they leave with some thoughts.
David,
that's what it's all about.
Don't most people walk away from you with a sense of horror?
Oh no, I'm not talking about my wife, just my wife. I mean, we'll see Zoltan after this. What happens? Maybe he'll pay back my trip.
That's a good possibility. All right. Do you want to run through the couple of images that you sent us?
Yeah, let's. So there are a couple of interesting things outside the place. We had a couple of Christian Pentecostals trying to tell us that we were hellbound and that we needed to be saved from someone. And there was also, I don't know if you can see, there was also a picture of, this one of my favorite. She was actually grabbing my ass right there. No, she wasn't. She was trying to, this lady was dressed in full gear, as you can see, and she was going around having people, she would read passages from a book, and you had to guess whether it was the Quran or the Bible, and most people couldn't tell which one was which. They're both very strange books with a lot of violence and a lot of problems. Now, the best thing about this conference is that they announced that that's the other picture. These are folks in the street protesting, and they were very, very nice, very courteous, but they all felt that we were hellbound, and they were very clear. They themselves wouldn't send us to hell. They would never do something like that, but the God that they adore would in a heartbeat. So they couldn't understand how their morality was better than that of their God. But anyway, the final thing on this is that they announced that the American Atheist is going to have a conference in Puerto Rico. Now, some of you may know this is where Bacardi was invented. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I encourage anyone that can go to Puerto Rico next year, I believe it's in August, that you make the trip there. You know, just for rational thinking kind of thing, and nothing else.
All right.
So,
well, thank you for that update. Zoltan, maybe you can start off just by giving us a little history for people that aren't familiar with transhumanism, like myself.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw was, I guess, Julian Huxley, who's the brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, and they're the grandchildren of Thomas Huxley, who is Darwin's bulldog in Defending Evolution. So there's a great family history there. Can you give us a little other background history on transhumanism?
Sure. Well, transhumanism really started making its appearance in the early 90s when philosophers like Max More and some others began popularizing it. However, it remained a small group until recently, until really the last 3 or 4 years, and now it's exploding in popularity. And just so your viewers know, transhumanism literally means beyond human, and it's essentially just using science and technology to improve the human experience, to improve the human body. And one of its main goals is to try to live indefinitely, again, using science and technology as the means to do that.
I want to point out something that notice that we started without giving much of a background for Zoltan himself. If we did that, we could spend the next 2 hours doing that. He's had an amazing life so far for such a young age, and so just so you know that it's no reflection on you. It's just that there's so much to discuss that if we go into your life, which is very interesting in itself, it would take us forever, and we'll run out of time about talking this topic in this great book.
Well, I guess one of the advantages of living forever is that he could take the time and talk about it. But what does that look like, Zoltan? Because there is a lot of kookiness in the atheist and skeptic community out there. There's people that are anti-vaxxers, and so some people think, hey, I'll just have my head cut off, frozen, and have it downloaded into a new body. You could see where, when you say something like that, it could turn some people off. What are the practical applications of transhumanism that you think people should consider?
Well, and I'm the first to admit that when you first hear the word, or you first think of some of the concepts, it does sound a little bit kooky. But the reality is that as a species, we have been using science and technology to improve the human experience and the human being for many centuries now. I mean, of course, many millenniums, but really since the Renaissance, we've been using a lot of it. And in the last 50 years, with vaccines and jet air travel, cell phone usage, the automobile, I don't consider these, typical transhuman technologies, but they are, and they're dramatically improving the lives of everyone around the world. So what are some of the new transhuman technologies, the things that really are going to take the movement and take the idea to the next level? Well, one of the ones is artificial hearts. Probably in 5 to 7 years, artificial hearts will actually be better than human hearts. And then becomes the question, with heart disease being the #1 killer around the world, is, well, when do you actually replace your own heart with an artificial heart? Let's say your own heart is good. My father had a heart attack at 51, and I'm just turned 41. So this is kind of classic transhuman technology. It's not so bizarre when you think of it in terms of something like that, because everyone is going to suffer from heart disease, or at some point. The same thing with cancer technologies that are coming out, and even with robotic limbs or augmenting limbs and bionics. We are going to make ourselves better as a species. It's just a natural form of evolution. And while it sounds a little science fiction-y, in the 21st century, it's no longer science fiction. There are people working on these technologies right now, and already, for example, I just read in the Smithsonian article yesterday that 100,000 surgeries have been done where they are starting to stimulate the inner parts of the brain so that people that can't move their arms or are paraplegic and stuff like that have a little bit more mobility and a little bit more ability to regain their normal state. And this is very transhuman. It's not awkward. If something bad happens to you medically, you're going to go for that transhuman technology. So it's definitely hitting the popular culture more and more and becoming more accepted.
Is there a whole range of beliefs inside transhumanists just on that technology end? Like, a lot of those things are standard technology that are going to get better and better. And I could certainly agree that 200 years from now, if we don't blow ourselves up first, we are going to have a lot of melding with the internet and computer stuff and regenerated limbs. Is there something that sets you aside as a transhumanist to say, well, we're much closer and we're going to be there in 10 or 20 years? Or is there a whole range? Some people buy a little bit and other people buy restoration of life in a decade or two.
Well, I think most scientists that are involved in it realize that it's not just my optimism. There's huge amounts of technologies that are being developed. And for example, mind uploading, or just even the idea of reversing aging. A lot of scientists generally feel that, within 10 to 30 years, most of these things are going to occur. It's just really a matter of time before we're able to reverse aging. In fact, even in a study in mice recently, we were able to do something similar to it. So while it sounds very far-fetched to the layperson and even to the thinker who's not actively involved in these companies or actively involved in this type of research, it is here today. I mean, I can tell you that the reason Google, for example, has started its company Calico about life extension is that this is the field that's going to dramatically change, how the human species views itself. It's also, relating to the show, quite to live forever really goes against some of the core ideas of many of the major formal religions. And so, it's going to be such interesting times here in the next 20 years. It's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years too. It's really, unless there's something cataclysmic, like I said, we blow ourselves up. You're going to see some incredible technologies. I wouldn't be surprised if all of us in the show right now live at least to 150 and probably far, far beyond.
Well, I have a couple moral questions I'd like to bring up. Christopher Hitchens had a discussion once where he said, well, at least in the place like North Korea, you can escape by dying. And what does it say when Kim Il-jung could live forever, or he could keep his servants living forever? And who gets to decide who gets this technology? It's like the only people who are millionaires get to afford these hearts. So on one hand, we have the acknowledgement that technology is moving in this direction, but where do the social responsibilities and controls come into place to ensure that there is equality and that this is not abused? Does transhumanism have an office of standards where they keep the kooks out from, separate the real technology from, the mumbo jumbo? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the most difficult areas of transhumanism, because currently there is no real ethical board out there. Google had announced that they would develop an ethical board regarding some of their artificial intelligence research, because that's such a dangerous topic, especially if the military was to be involved in something like that. But generally, this is, and this is in fact what my book's about. You're going to see a conflict in the media, in politics, in all government here in the next 5 to 10 years. You're going to see it happening daily, probably in Congress, as people challenge, the status quo and say, well, what about artificial hearts? Will Medicare cover, will Obamacare cover all that? If it is better, and can we afford that? I mean, it's a massive surgery. These are the kind of challenges that are going to occur really seriously in the next 5 to 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised if, as in my book, you see some even kind of street clashes and a little bit of civil conflict because of these issues. Because a huge amount of the people will say, well, is it correct? And then another huge amount of people will say, can we afford it? And then, of course, transhumanists will say, well, it's brilliant. And, there's going to be these clashes. Just to answer one important question, though, I don't believe that it's going to remain only a rich person's game. I don't think any transhumanist wants that. I think most transhumanists want it to be, the technologies to be broadly available. I see transhumanism sort of like I see the cell phone, which is, yes, 20 years ago, the cell phone was unaffordable to virtually everyone on the planet except some Wall Street people. However, now, even some of the poorest people in sub-Saharan Africa can have a cell phone, and maybe even have two. And the automobile, for example, you can buy a used car in California for around $300-400.
Yeah, but we're talking and I got you, but there are also places right now in the world, Zoltan, where people don't have cell phones. They're dying of diarrhea. They don't even have, they don't have medicine of any type. And what we're talking about is an individual who is able to outlive all of his enemies that he or she can oppress or keep down. And so I'm just wondering, like, how at the forefront. What you're advocating is a tremendous technological advancement for the human species, but with that comes an unprecedented level of responsibility that we as a species have never even had to examine before, which is an individual can outlive the people that he's oppressing 3 or 4 times over. So I'm just wondering, where are you as an individual, where's the movement really focusing on having to, because anyone can advocate this technology. It's another thing to advocate the integration of the responsibility of how to handle it.
No, and of course, and I'm excited that you're even bringing this up, because I have been knocking on the door of the transhumanism movement, saying for a long time that one of the most important things that transhumanism is not addressing right now is the morals involved. And my book is essentially a book about morals, even though it's quite radical, and many transhumanists would perhaps even disagree with a lot of the radicalness in it. It brings up these ideas of what is ethical, how can we share it. In the best case opinion, everyone in the world, every single person would have access to it. Will that happen? That's very difficult to say. This is why I hope that governments and TV shows like your own report about it and ask these questions, because the more people that ask, the better chance the world has of deciding these things up front, ahead of time, and really approaching it from kind of a democratic way, which says, well, how can we offer the greatest good to the species?
So, one of the things that David said right at the outset is we didn't give you much of an introduction. For people that pick up your book, how much of you is inside Jethro Knights there? There's a whole bunch of overlaps. How much is there? How much would you disown from that? How associated do you want to be with Jethro Knights?
Well, I support a lot of Jethro Knight's actions, and I know that in certain terms he takes the world to a totalitarian state, and he does some of these other things, but he ultimately returns to a very democratic, peaceful world where he makes a serious effort to give the broad swath of population these technologies. Jethro Knights is trying to create a transhumanist-inspired world, as I am too, even just by this discussion. I'm certainly not as radical as he is in some of his ideas on, pushing transhumanism down everyone's throats. However, perhaps if I was about to die, or perhaps if my, as in the book happens, his wife is killed, I might have a more aggressive stance. But I do support many of the ideas in the Transhumanist Wager. It's a philosophical novel. It's designed to put forth these ideas and to support them. But ultimately, I'm hoping that the real message that comes out from the Transhumanist Wager is that we can create a world where everyone gets to benefit from it. My greatest goal, or at least one of my greatest goals, would be that every single person on the planet maximizes who they can be through transhumanist technology, because I believe we're all valuable. And so that would be something that's really nice to achieve.
So, Zoltan, what's the difference between transhumanist science and just plain old science and regular science? I mean, it seems like science is taking us there to that future without us having to call it transhumanism. What's the difference between science and transhumanist science?
Sure. Well, in theory, of course, there's no difference. But what I think is happening with transhumanism is it's become a easier way to label radical science, radical technology for living indefinitely and for seriously changing the species. I think what's happening is science has taken the human being and made it live better. But what's really happening here in the next 10, 20, and 30 years is there's going to be a paradigm shift. As soon as you can upload yourself into a computer, or as soon as you can, for example, reverse aging, then all the institutions of society will start to fall away. Will we have children if we're going to live 1,000 years? Will anyone get married if you're going to live indefinitely? I mean, there's a massive sense of the institutions of our species breaking down once we start doing things like living inside a computer. I think a lot of the ideas that we have right now will fall apart. And that's why I like to call it transhumanism, because it is a different type of science in the sense that it is growing so quickly, as they would say in the singularity terms. It's just like a J-curve, and all of a sudden you hit that vertical spot, and then all of a sudden it starts transcending all our perceptions of a human being. It just goes too quickly. And I think our normal two-car, everyone has two kids, type of lifestyle, especially here in the Western world, will very quickly fall apart.
Well, last question. What is a singularity? You just said
Sure.
the singularity. That seems to be kind of a key.
Yeah, it's an important point. A singularity is kind of where transhumanists are going. A singularity is that moment in time when technology starts increasing so quickly that it basically leaves behind all sense of our understanding. Because we've been growing scientifically exponentially for a long time, 2, 4, 8, 16 kind of thing, and that's what's happening with science and technology. And eventually we'll get to a point where artificial intelligence will take that over, and its growth, its evolution will happen so quickly. In probably one day, you will have more evolutionary and technological growth than you might have had in the entire existence of the universe beforehand. And this is what we call the singularity.
Well, it comes off as very Arthur C. Clarke-y, 2001. If you've ever read the whole series, this is exactly how through 2001 through, 3001, he describes this process. But there is a question, and there's a moral question too, which is not necessarily religious, but the question is, what right do we have to live forever? Like, what right do I have to not make way for a younger generation? I mean, part of what defines us as a human species, part of it, not exclusively, is that we die, and that we pass on what we learn to younger people. As the song goes, there's a time where we're born and there's a time where we die. We're fundamentally changing ourselves as a species simply by not dying. And how does that affect the social infrastructure at that point?
And creativity. I think a lot of the creativity is done by young people. When you look at who wins the Nobel Prizes or when they did the discoveries, it's all done at a very young age. So if everybody's going to be pretty old, will that affect innovation?
Well, so 2 questions. First off, with creativity, many of us will have microchips in our heads in 15 years. There are already many people around America that already have certain things going on. It's just a matter of developing and combining ourselves with machines so that our sense of creativity will become something much more dramatically different. We will have servers that are potentially a million times more powerful than in the connections than our brains are. As I like to say, the Empire State Building will be the size of our brain, filled with servers. So our creativity and our brilliance will be something that's quite different. But kind of just going back to your question about is it ethical or not ethical to die? This is first off a fascinating question, and I think it's one of the most important ones to answer because, again, we're talking about a paradigm shift. This is why transhumanism is actually what it is, as opposed to just some type of science that's helping people, is that it will fundamentally change how we go around and go about our lives, especially as a species. The idea of having kids, if you're going to live indefinitely, is something that might dramatically change. Will we have to make room? Well, transhumanists would say, we were just put on this planet to do these things. This is how we evolved. But we can also evolve out of that. And we also have just as much of a right to not die as we do to die. In fact, it's just a personal choice. It's a matter of gaining enough power and enough science and technology and how to use that to make that choice. I would say not dying is just another form, lap on the evolutionary game that we're playing as a species. And eventually there'll be other massive paradigm shifts in existence and how we perceive things. It'll probably be pure energy in 100, 200 years, and how we go out about doing these things. So whether it's a right or not to die, this is very much a personal decision. I think probably it will always be allowed if people want to die and make way for the next generation. But I think transhumanists should also have the right to not die and go about their lives in a way that they want using such radical science and technology.
Zoltan, if I can jump back to the beginning of your novel, you start out your protagonist out in the middle of the ocean, the radio is short-circuited, he's completely on his own. How important is that sense of rugged individualism for the whole transhumanist movement?
Well, I would say it's very important for me But I want to be clear that, my novel, while it's, done very well and many transhumanists like it, it also has upset quite a few transhumanists because it is so radical. Some transhumanists would definitely not support rugged individualism. They would say, this is actually, we're going towards a mind hive, kind of an idea where everyone will be connected through technology. Everyone will be in some type of socialistic, communist type state where we balance each other, we help each other, and that's the main goal, becoming one giant entity.
I guess if I can jump in, can I jump in and just expand that question a little? My assumption before reading much about this was that humanism was a main point of transhumanism, and after reading it, it seems like science and extension of life maybe is just as big or bigger. Are there two different waves of transhumanism where for some people humanism is key and others it's not?
Absolutely. And at this point in time, the transhumanist movement is very divided amongst how it plans to go, especially politically and socially. In fact, I find it one of the great things I love about transhumanism, and I wrote one of these articles for the Huffington Post, is that it incorporates virtually every single community on the planet. There are, speaking of Mormons, there's a Mormon transhumanist organization. Of course, there's atheist transhumanists like myself, and then there are transhumanists who are communists or socialists and just really want to share technology broadly for the species. It completely incorporates all the LGBT people and completely incorporates, in fact, some of the radical people that would say, bad things, the hypocrites, as you were talking about earlier. It's a movement that is beautiful in the sense that it really allows everyone into it. Of course, most formally religious people just very much despise it. But again, that's because it cuts at virtually all the fundamental core parts of the Bible, which is especially, we will become gods. That is sort of the transhumanist, one of the transhumanist ideas.
Well, one of the problems technology poses is the more complex technology gets, the more vulnerable we as a species are to it. You may remember a few years back they had the giant power outage out in Canada and in the eastern seaboard with New York, and stores couldn't even run manual cash registers. The roads were all shut down. This leads a very important question, okay, as individuals, as self-contained beings that have become reliant upon ourselves versus a broader social infrastructure, do we become more at risk as a species if we're all tied into each other and wired into one another? If there's some mass virus or mass breakdown in this system, do we not put ourselves at risk for extinction if we fully embrace transhumanism?
So, this is one of the central worries about transhumanism in itself, is that as we evolve with science and technology, we are especially evolving towards a place where we have less control over the technology that we're using day to day. Most people have no idea how a cell phone works, have no idea how a computer works, and yet all our money and many of our resources are kind of put into this digital world that we actually have no power over. We just use it because it simply works. Yes, 100%. The challenge in the future is to really get governments and people to understand that massive amounts of ethics and consideration of morals and philosophy have to go into how to make it so that the species itself doesn't disappear through some weird anomaly that nobody saw coming. Currently, that's very difficult to happen. It would take a virus, but then people could separate themselves. I mean, a biological virus. But, it can be very different in the digital world. And we must take every precaution necessary. And a lot of the conspiracy theory shows, I've been on a few recently, are incredibly worried about this, thinking that, perhaps an elite group of people or something like this is leading us down this path. I can only say that as a person who, I want the governments to really take this seriously. This is one of the things I've been pushing for with a lot of my articles that I've been writing and constantly badgering people and politicians and stuff, is take this seriously. Technology is changing the world, and most people are like, it's science fiction, but it's actually not science fiction anymore. And to run governments, to run the world, to make sure that we don't have some type of nuclear weapon that explode accidentally because some hacker got in, These are incredibly serious things, and the government should spend a lot of money, and I'm not a big fan of government spending money, but I do believe this one's important because you're right. This time the species is at stake. While technology and science is wonderful, if it destroys us, it's certainly not it.
Are there any aspects of transhumanism that you don't agree with or you don't think they're right, or any aspects at all?
At this point in time, I'm very open to virtually all of it. I put forth most of my ideas in my novel, which is, what I would call activism transhumanism. It's basically a very activist approach. But at the same time, I think most transhumanists are not so aggressive with their ideas. They just simply want to use science and technology to improve the human species. And even I, when it comes to discussing these things with religious people who are very against transhumanism, I make a point of compromising. I make a point of saying, well, maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle and try to push transhumanism forward, but perhaps not at the speed that I wanted. As long as it can be used to improve the lives of myself, my family members, and others around me, then I'll be quite happy.
Because it seems that a lot of futurists tend to be wrong when it comes to predicting the future. I mean, that's one criticism that I often hear about transhumanism, that, if you go back to the 50s, if you go back to the 1920s, if you go back, that typically the futurists, the people that are making predictions, usually miss it by miles or totally.
It is true. Futurists have a habit of missing, and I could be very optimistic in some of my ideas too. But I think even this conversation is proof of how far that we're on Skype, that you're in a studio, and and the East Coast. It's incredible how much technology there is now. We have perhaps many people on their cell phones just watching it. Technology is changing the way we interact, and eventually, quite soon, I'm just reading the New York Times that they're now doing brainwave things and stuff like that. We will be having these perhaps without even machines. Everything will just be interconnected through our heads. And again, that's technology that's being worked on today, so it'll probably be out in 10 or 15 years.
Well, and this brings up some really interesting questions. You have a large portion of the world is religious. There are also people that are not transhumanists that embrace technology that could sit there and say, I don't want a computer chip in my head, but I don't want to be at a disadvantage from you because I choose not to have a computer chip in my head. And I think there are some real moral questions there. Are we saying that part of the human species is just going to become obsolete or is going to be Darwined out through technology? Or do we find a place for people and their beliefs and their values to exist and not be at a disadvantage that don't want to go along with some of these technological advancements?
No, and this is one of the fundamental questions. I recently wrote an article for the Huffington Post called "Are We Heading for a Jesus Singularity?" And it was this realization that I had that, unfortunately, with Congress, full of Christians and full of religious people, and they're probably going to hold their power in the next 20 years, and artificial intelligence will probably be here in 15, 20 years, and I consider that one of the most important things that will happen to the species. It will literally change science overnight, probably. The idea is, how can we, as a species, make these choices to incorporate this technology into ourselves without upsetting those that don't want it? And I believe that as I had mentioned earlier, the idea here is many transhumanists might need to compromise a little and say, well, let's take smaller steps. Maybe they don't want chips in their heads, but I think if they see some of us having chips in our heads, and then they can also keep their, religious ideas or their cultural ideas, perhaps they'll be more inclined to do so. I think those ultimately that don't do it, though, will be, as you said, Darwined out. That certainly just is the way it'll work. It's like somebody not using a car today. If they live in the suburbs, I don't know, they can use buses and stuff like that, or not using a cell phone, but it puts them at a serious disadvantage. And the same thing's going to happen with other transhuman technologies that get incorporated into people. I think they will eventually have to do it. I think they're just going to probably program their chips so it makes them stay within their cultural boundaries, within their religious ideologies and stuff like that. And if that happens, and we're moving forward as a species, that's something that's good enough for me, especially if I can live longer and better.
Or they could revolt. And that's a very real possibility, which is that you could find large enough of this species that has decided that it rejects some type of disparity and they can revolt. And then we go back to the thing about the complexity of the technology and the vulnerability. So you may very well see a battle of the species, and it'll be a question of who wins.
So that's what my novel is about. That's exactly, my novel is against this religious conflict. And then they kick out the transhumanists, and the transhumanists go and build this seasteading nation where they develop their own technologies in the middle of the ocean. Yeah, I believe actually there probably will be a conflict.
In a way, we already have that today with Islam, for instance, and trying to keep social change and Western philosophy basically trying to push things backwards. So I think there's a war already going on of that type. Still, I notice that a lot of people will embrace technology while railing against it. So I think you might be right. It might be.
Well, that's fair, but there's the question of what purpose does the technology serve, and I literally can believe, because I understand and appreciate the dangers where you have something where someone else can access your thoughts, and I can see where people would revolt against their own individuality being endangered. And I guess it is one of these things that we do need to be having talks about. This is an important time for atheists and skeptics to be bringing these issues forward, as Zoltan is doing, because if we don't have this discussion, other people will, and it's definitely something that I'm very glad we're having on the show.
Yeah, Zoltan, I want to jump on one of the kind of moral points that Paul was raising earlier. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
With 2 minutes left.
With 2 minutes left to answer. What does that mean for the whole idea of I think you called it an omnipotender? Like when somebody gets all that power, what's the built-in way that you guys propose to prevent a catastrophe from happening?
Well, this is a very difficult question, and this is actually the subject of my sequel, which I'm working on at the moment, is how far does one go? Is it this, this is a very different question. Is it a good moral thing from a civil, society's point of view to let one person achieve that power? It's almost like an omnipotent God. And, we don't have enough time to discuss it, but the idea is that I have put forth a philosophy where everyone strives to become the very best that they can be. And that ends up being the omnipotender in my book. But, whether others will agree with that, whether we can have 7 billion people all wanting to be omnipotent beings is a whole nother question. But the philosophy is just trying to enable the individual to improve themselves dramatically and become, I suppose, the best transhumanist that they can possibly be.
It seems like technology tends to magnify the goodness or the badness that people have. So the worse people with technology become worse, the better people become better, and the war continues.
And definitely, I agree with that.
Can you say maybe a few closing words? When we hear about a wager in atheism, think about Pascal's wager. How does a transhumanist wager play on that? What's the meaning of your title?
Sure. Well, the transhumanist wager, just really quickly, is that in the 21st century, with so much science and technology, we now have the ability within 10, 20, 30 years to eliminate death, eliminate human morality. And that's the wager that everyone needs to make. If you really love your life, then you're going to dedicate your resources and energies to the transhumanism movement to overcome human mortality so that you can live much longer and hopefully.
Well, I think you can still hear us. Well, I'm going to invite people to go to our Facebook page, and I'm going to put this video up later, and I invite you, Zoltan, to engage some comments there, engage the viewers. And until next week, this is Road to Reason, Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. We'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.